All right. Well, good morning, and thank you very much, Jay. We're excited to be here. Um, Let me get set up here. We'll start off with a little introductions. We'll just get right into our presentation here. My name's Scott Christensen. I've been with Crash Data Group for just over 5 years. My primary job here is providing support to our customers. I'm a retired police officer. I worked for a city police department in Southern California for 23 years, 18 of which was a traffic accident reconstructionist. So I'm pretty familiar with vehicle crash data and how it can be applied to traffic investigations. And joining me today is my colleague Dan Walker, also with Crash Data Group. And Dan, I will let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everyone. I come from the automotive supplier industry, retiring from Bosch. I spent many years in their diagnostic scan tool division, as well as their crash data retrieval product group. So you may ask yourself, well, who is Crash Data Group and how do these guys know about event data recorders, vehicle black boxes and crash data? Our core business is being a product distributor of EDR Retrieval Tools for North America. Second, we are the publisher of Collision Magazine, which is a biannual periodical focusing solely on vehicle crash topics, research, and technologies. We also hold the industry-leading event data recorder trade conference called the EDR Summit. And we also host the Crash Hub website, which is a directory of vehicle crash reconstructionists and forensics experts. Crash Data Group, we do not provide any crash data services. We're a product distributor, but if you need a third-party vendor to download data or analyze crash data for a claim, we provide the Crash Hub expert directory as a resource. In summary, we've been involved in this industry for more than 20 years. To clarify a little limitation about today's presentation, the topics we're talking about apply only to light-duty passenger vehicles, cars, pickup trucks, crossovers, SUVs, et cetera, et cetera. The following does not apply to medium-duty or heavy-duty trucks. Even though some of these big vehicles do have EDRs, they're not included in today's presentation and training. And now I'll pass it back to Scott.
All right. So for our objectives today, we'll briefly go over insurance claim investigations, what you're doing now, and what else is available. We'll give a brief overview of event data recorders, what they are and how they're used. We'll discuss some practical applications of how you can use EDR data to enhance your investigations and to expose insurance fraud. We'll briefly discuss client consent and legal issues related to the collection of EDR data. We'll go over the methods used to retrieve EDR data. And finally, we'll discuss the different EDR retrieval tools that are available. So what are you doing now as part of your investigations? And really, has much changed over the years? You likely start off by going over party and witness statements, re-interview the parties. I'm sure you've found that party statements can often be very self-serving, and witness statements often include what they believe must have happened rather than what they actually saw. So statements, although necessary, can often create more questions than provide answers. You likely assess damage to the involved vehicles to see if anything may be inconsistent with the statements you've obtained, and then don't a lot of your cases end there. You still have lots of unanswered questions. You're an investigator. You have a hunch things aren't adding up. You just don't have the evidence to prove it. So what else is there? Crash data retrieval, EDR data, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. EDR stands for Event Data Recorder, and we'll go into more detail about event data recorders in just a second. EDRs provide unbiased, reliable data, real facts, real data. It's not ranges or estimates. You already interview parties and witnesses. You can interview the vehicle as well. EDR data provides powerful evidence that will tell you what the vehicle was doing before and during the crash event. So what is an event data recorder or an EDR? EDRs are often called the black box of a vehicle. EDRs are installed in a vehicle as part of the manufacturing process. EDRs record specific vehicle and occupant information for a brief period of time before, during, and after a crash event. EDRs are not continuously recording data. A crash or other significant event has to occur for data to be recorded to the EDR. EDRs are typically a function of a vehicle safety system and are primarily contained in the airbag computer known as the Airbag Control Module, or ACM. The airbag control module's main purpose is to tell the car exactly when to deploy an airbag. And to do that, the ACM needs to gather lots of information about what the vehicle is doing in real time. So things like vehicle speed, brake status, etc. And much of that information is recorded to the EDR when a crash occurs. Data may also be contained in other vehicle modules as well, but again, the data is most often contained in and retrieved from the airbag control module of a vehicle. So let's talk about the different data elements or types of data you can expect to find in most EDRs. Most EDRs contain the impact delta V, or the change in velocity. Delta V is used to determine the severity of an impact and can be used to assess the potential for bodily injury in a car crash. In addition, most EDRs record 5 seconds of pre-crash data. Pre-crash data is exactly that. It's pre-crash. So what was happening 5 seconds before impact? Many EDRs record this data in 1 second or half-second intervals and include things like vehicle speed. So how fast was the car going 5 seconds before the impact, 4 seconds before, 3 seconds before, etc. And other common pre-crash data elements include things like brake status, the throttle position, steering input, seatbelt status, occupant detection, and a whole lot more. In 2012, the federal government began setting some minimum standards on types of data that must be recorded in certain EDRs. But it should be known that the auto manufacturers are not limited to the amount or type of data that can be recorded. So some EDRs also record things such as ABS activity. Was the ABS system activated? If so, when? Stability control status, time between multiple crash events, the tire pressure warning status, which is great evidence for a driver's claim that a tire blowout caused them to lose control of their car, gear selector position, vehicle roll angle, and a whole lot more. It should be known that the auto manufacturers use these same EDR retrieval tools themselves for their own internal investigations and safety research. So as a result, the auto manufacturers have been adding more and more data elements that are recorded in their event data recorders. And as automotive technology evolves, so does EDR data. So EDRs of the future will include things like geocoordinates of the event. This is now available in some General Motors vehicles. Time and date stamps of the recorded events. This is also available in some vehicles now. We'll start seeing things like photos, both outside the vehicle and inside the car, showing the driver and occupants. Video is likely to be captured in the future, and a whole lot of other things. So it's pretty exciting to think about what's coming in the near future. So what constitutes an event as far as event data recorders are concerned? Remember, an event must occur for data to be recorded. An event occurs when the vehicle experiences a very sudden speed change, and this is most typically from a crash, and that speed change that meets or exceeds a trigger threshold that's set by the auto manufacturers. There are 2 trigger thresholds that may cause data to be recorded to the event data recorder, so there are 2 types of events. And those 2 types of events are a deployment event. A deployment event occurs when a safety system in a vehicle is deployed, and the most common of which is an airbag deployment, so we're pretty familiar with that. So if an airbag was deployed, crash data was saved to the event data recorder. Then there's a non-deployment event, and this occurs when a vehicle experiences a very sudden speed change, again most likely from a crash, that didn't deploy an airbag, but it did meet a certain trigger threshold that's set by the auto manufacturers to record the EDR data. So what type of incident triggers data to be recorded either as a non-deployment or deployment event? Damage sustained by the vehicle can be used to assess whether or not a non-deployment or deployment event likely occurred. If you encounter a vehicle that has minor scrapes, scratches, or abrasions, you would likely not expect for an event to have been recorded. Even some minor body damage or a broken headlight assembly may be present without an event having been recorded. When you start to see things that could be considered moderate damage, the hood buckled, structural damage, things like that, then you're getting into the realm where you could expect that a non-deployment event likely was recorded. And finally, when you see severe damage with an airbag deployment, you can be pretty confident that data was recorded due to a deployment event. It should be noted that it never hurts to perform a download. If you have any questions at all, download the data. The worst thing that could happen is that the report will indicate that no events was recorded, and that by itself can actually be very useful information in a lot of your cases. People often ask us, how fast does the car have to be traveling for an event to be recorded? Remember, there are non-deployment events and deployment events that can be recorded. The speed the vehicle was traveling really is not much of a factor into whether or not an event will be recorded. It's the speed change or impact severity the vehicle experiences during a crash that determines whether or not an event is recorded. And that speed change is indicated as delta V, which is what we were going into a little bit earlier, or the change in velocity. Delta V is typically indicated in miles per hour and sometimes as kilometers per hour. Delta V is not the speed the vehicle was traveling at the time of the crash. It's the sudden speed change the vehicle experienced as a result of the crash. Certain thresholds indicated as delta V are set by the auto manufacturers to record data as either a non-deployment or a deployment event. And these trigger thresholds vary by the system installed in the vehicles as well as by the auto manufacturers themselves. So let's take a closer look at delta V, as it's an important concept to understand when using EDR data. Here we see the red car is traveling at a speed of 25 miles per hour. If it were to hit a guardrail, the guardrail is going to absorb some of the speed from that crash, as well as the car itself. It's going to absorb some of the speed from the crash. And this can affect the delta V, or the speed change that the vehicle experiences during the crash event. If it were to strike a solid object, let's say a big solid object that doesn't move at all, we see that the speed the vehicle was traveling at the time of the event was 25 miles per hour. We would expect to see the delta V close to that speed, likely a little bit less than that due to the fact that some of the speed was absorbed by the vehicle during the crash. Now, if the red car was traveling at a speed of 55 miles per hour and there was a blue car traveling in front of it at 45 miles per hour in the same direction, the red car will eventually crash into the rear of the blue car. For the red car, the speed it was traveling at the time of the crash was 55 miles per hour. But we would expect to see the delta V, or speed change, for the red car. Sorry about that. Got ahead of myself. We would expect to see the delta V, or speed change, for the red car in the neighborhood or slightly less than 10 miles per hour, as that was the net speed change experienced by the red car as a result of the collision.
Hey,
In this
Dan,
example, yeah,
I'm sorry, we got plenty of time, so I'm going to change up on the fly here and ask you questions in real time. So
okay,
bear with my impromptu change here.
sure.
One of the questions we have is, will EDR records be recorded if the vehicle is parked? If the EDR is off?
Yeah, we're going to get into that in just a little bit in a few more topics here. We'll be getting that. It's a real good question. And that's a real common practice with insurance companies that use EDR data. It's a question that comes up a lot. So stick with us for just a little bit, and I think we're going to be able to address that question.
Great. Thank you so much.
No worries. All right, so let's get back here. In this example, we're still talking about delta V. Again, that's a real important concept you kind of need to understand, as that's what's triggering the event data recorder to record the data. So in this example, we see that the red car is completely stopped for a traffic light. Its speed is 0 miles per hour. The blue car is traveling at a speed of 35 miles per hour and crashes into the back of the red car. The data for the red car indicates that its speed at the time of impact is 0 miles per hour. Right? The red car's delta V would likely be less than 35 miles per hour due to some of the speed being absorbed by the involved vehicles. The data for the blue car indicates that its speed at impact was 35 miles per hour, and we would expect to see the delta V less than 35 miles per hour. So you can see delta V is the speed change that a vehicle experiences during a crash, not the speed that it was actually traveling. So let's go over some of the ways you can use EDR data as part of your claims evaluations. As we were talking about, fraud detection is probably the most common use of crash data by insurance companies today. And that's both intentional fraud and unintentional fraud. As you know, vague, misleading statements can be forms of unintentional insurance fraud. And those misleading statements can often be exposed or dispelled with vehicle crash data. Crash data can be used in many scenarios to either corroborate or invalidate statements when other evidence just doesn't exist. And again, impact severity, it's indicated as delta V, is used to assess the potential for bodily injury in traffic accidents. So here we're going to address this question: hit while unattended or parked unoccupied claims. And those are a very common fraud practice, as you know. EDR data can be very powerful evidence in these types of cases. There's a very basic concept you need to understand to use EDR data to expose insurance fraud in these cases. And here's where we get to about parked vehicles. Remember, the data is contained in the airbag control module. The airbag control module has to be powered up to record crash data. The engine doesn't necessarily have to be running, but the key has to be in the ignition and in the on position when a crash occurs for data to be recorded. So if a car was truly parked and off when it was hit, it doesn't matter how severe the impact was or how severe the damage is to the vehicle, no event or data would be recorded to the EDR because there was no power available to the airbag control module when the crash occurred. However, if an event was recorded, that means the car was on and possibly in motion when this crash occurred. So EDR data can be used to dispel the claim that it was parked and off when a crash occurred. And I think that is kind of answering the question of parked vehicles and can EDR data be used with parked vehicles. Just the key concept to understand here is that the airbag control module is where the EDR is contained. It has to have power available to it when a crash occurs for it to record data. Otherwise, no data will be recorded to the event data recorder. So in this example, we have an insured that claims he parked his car in front of his house overnight. When he woke up, he went outside and saw that someone hit his parked car and left the scene. So he files a claim with his insurance company. There are a couple questions that I would ask this claimant before downloading the crash data. Lock him into a statement that the car was off when the crash occurred and that the keys were not possibly left in the ignition and on when this crash supposedly occurred. And based on what we discussed earlier, looking at the damage sustained to this car, we would expect to see at least a non-deployment event had been recorded if the car was on when the crash occurred. So now go ahead and download the data. If it shows no events recorded, that could corroborate the claim that the car was truly parked and off when the crash occurred. In this case, an event was recorded. The crash data here shows that the vehicle was traveling 33 miles per hour 5 seconds before impact and almost 14 miles per hour at impact. Therefore, the car was on and moving when this crash occurred. So when confronted with the crash data, the insured withdrew his claim. And feedback from the insurance companies that we deal with that use the crash data retrieval tools indicates that approximately 70% of their hit while unattended claims are either withdrawn by the claimant or proven to be fraudulent when EDR data and EDR tools are used. So it's really pretty powerful evidence in these types of claims.
We have another question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If there's an event and there's no EDR reading done, and then there's a second event, will the second event override the first event?
Okay. Yeah, like I say, there's two types of events that are recorded in an event data recorder. Okay, a deployment event is typically locked in and stays there. So if an airbag deployed or a seatbelt retentioner or other deployment device in the vehicle was deployed as a result of a crash, that data is locked into and stays in the event data recorder. And then the non-deployment events are a little bit different. Understand that non-deployment events and deployment events, the data is the same. The recorded data is the same. It's just a different method that the system uses to whether or not to record the data. Most systems save several non-deployment events, and they stay in that event data recorder indefinitely until, and at some point, they're overwritten by another non-deployment event. Some systems, most systems hold up to 3 non-deployment events. Some store more than that, but typically, so it stays there. There's not a time threshold. Well, yeah, they only stay there for 90 days and then they're erased. They stay there indefinitely unless they're overwritten by subsequent non-deployment events. But most systems store 2, 3, or more non-deployment events. So realistically, unless you've got someone that's driving around crashing all over the place and playing bumper cars with their car, your data is pretty stable. It's likely going to be there even sometime after the crash event.
Great. Thank you so much.
No problem. All right, so we'll get back here. Here's another scenario. Multiple impact collisions such as your inline chain reaction crash. Who hit whom first? You've got parties pointing fingers at each other. You don't have any witnesses. I worked a lot of these cases as a police officer, and I'm here to tell you, physical evidence at the scene will likely not answer the question of who hit whom first. So you're left with, as an investigator, unknown as the cause of the collision, and in your case, likely pay at least a portion of the claim. So how can EDR data answer the question of who hit whom first? In this example, data was downloaded from the gray car, and it showed that 2 separate events or impacts occurred in rapid succession. Data showed the first impact to have a positive delta V. This indicates that the car was being pushed forward. The second impact in this series of crashes showed a negative delta V, indicating it hit an object in front of it, in this case, the white car. So there you can answer who hit whom first. And again, you likely could not have determined this by physical evidence alone at the scene. Most EDRs record whether or not the seatbelt was buckled for seats that have a corresponding airbag. This information can be useful in determining the potential for injury of a driver or passenger. Okay. Most automotive seats with a corresponding airbag are equipped with sensors to detect the presence of an occupant. Many seats also contain weight classification sensors and/or seat track position sensors. The information from these sensors is used by the airbag computer to determine the precise moment to deploy an airbag to best protect the occupant. And many EDRs record this information, which can be used to determine not only the mere presence of a person, but also give some sort of indication as to the physical size of the occupant. It's very useful information to detect or dispel jump-in type fraud cases. Many newer vehicles are being equipped with rear seat airbag systems, and these seats will have some form of occupant detection that will be recorded to the EDR. So if you have a case where a driver stated there was a passenger in the vehicle that sustained injury and you have your doubts, EDR data can shed some light as to the presence of a passenger or passengers at the time of the crash. If you suspect a driver switch, possibly because of an excluded driver that was driving at the time of the crash, so if you have a driver that is 6'2", 230 pounds, but the driver's seat showed to be in the forwardmost position with a mid-weight classification, you can use this data to press your insured about the true facts. So think about it. Do you have to change the seat position because your husband or wife last drove your car, right? Okay, so EDR data may be able to capture that. EDR data can help answer some questions about how many occupants were in the vehicle at the time of the crash. Was the driver alone, or were there passengers in the car as well? And who had their seatbelt buckled? EDR data can often expose certain types of staged crashes as well. In this example, the red car stopped for a red traffic light. Your insured approaches from the rear and safely comes to a complete stop. The driver of the red car intentionally puts his car in reverse and again intentionally collides into your insured. The driver of the red car claims he was injured due to being rear-ended by your insured. And without any witnesses, what are you left with? Realistically, you're left with damage that's consistent with the driver of the red car's statement. So you're able to download EDR data from your insured's vehicle. The data clearly shows that your vehicle came to a complete stop 3 seconds prior to the impact. The data also showed a negative delta V, indicating it was struck from the front. So does that change the outcome of this claim? And those are just a couple examples of how insurance companies are using EDR data to expose insurance fraud and investigate auto insurance claims. Crash data can be used in many scenarios to help answer questions related to your investigations.
I have another question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I've got a question. What is the minimum weight, passenger weight, the minimum that a passenger weight to reflect a passenger? So in essence is, if you have a small child that doesn't weigh a lot, would they be reflective on the recorder, or is there a minimum weight requirement?
Yeah, it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. There's no set standard, not only about weight classification. I just wanted to mention related to the other topics that we're talking about, number of events recorded. Every vehicle manufacturer does things slightly different, but many modern cars, as you'll know, if someone's sitting in the passenger seat and they're not buckled in, you'll get a warning indicator. Again, there is no set weight that's standard for that, but most modern cars will detect a small child, even as light as 40, 50 pounds, or maybe even lighter, or if there's a car seat. So again, there's no direct answer that would universally cover all vehicles.
I'd be interested also myself. Thank you for that. And I think we're going to get to this in a few minutes. But obstacles getting the EDR data and what people don't want us to get it and how you overcome that. And you're probably going to be talking about this in a few minutes, but I'd be interested again, is obstacles people put in our way so we can't get the data, either practically or legally.
Yeah, I think we're going to get into that here a little bit with this next topic. I think in answer to that question generally is educate your claimant, your insured, whoever you're working with, on what EDR data is. If they have something to hide, they may be a little more reluctant. If they're not, it's going to validate what they're saying. It can only help them if they're being truthful and that. So I think educating the people about what the event data recorder is, what type of information it contains, would probably assist with that. The more information the people have, they maybe feel a little bit more at ease. As a police officer working with EDR data and different people, it was just letting them know this is going, if you're telling me the truth about what's happening, this is going to help your case rather than hurt it. This is just going to validate everything that you're saying. So I think educating people on what it is will probably be the best result in getting them to cooperate with you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
One more question, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, for high-end vehicles equipped with entertainment information systems, is there a way for the EDR software to tag the date of the event in question? What is often seen is the number of ignition cycles in an event. It'd be nice to tag a date to the event.
Yeah, as Scott mentioned earlier, typically the time date of the event is not recorded. We're starting to see that more in newer vehicles. Again, that's what the EDR records. There is additional equipment, which we're not discussing today, that can get information from the infotainment system that may expand on not only time and date, but additional information. But typically the EDRs don't have time date, but we're seeing that change with newer vehicles. And again, there's no universal statement, or when did that go into effect? Every vehicle is different. Every manufacturer designs their EDR differently, but we can say there's a common thread that they're adding more and more information as the vehicles advance. the technology is being implemented more into these vehicles. We're seeing a lot more data. So what Scott touched on before, what's coming in the future is really exciting, what we're going to see in newer vehicles.
And another question, if you don't mind, is EDR data used internationally? For example, we've an investigator who handles Latin American investigations. Is it available down south of the border?
Yes and no. There are tools that are sold around the globe. Some manufacturers limit the EDR accessibility. For example, Scott's going to get in here about the regulations for the United States, where it's required to have, if you have an EDR, you have to have information available. That's slowly changing around the globe. We know that in Europe as well as in Asia Pacific, they're also implementing similar acts so that this data must be made available. But global vehicles sold outside North America may or may not record the EDR. That EDR functionality may be turned off. And I can't speak specifically of what's going on in South America. I know there's one brand, Toyota, for example, they open it up around the globe, but every other brand does it differently.
Oh, good. I've got another really good question I think you're going to like is, who would the criminal prosecutor contact to testify to the reliability of the data? So again, if you're a criminal prosecutor, who would they contact to testify to the reliability of the data on a case?
We're actually going to touch on that a little bit later. The EDR tools are either made by the car manufacturers themselves, or they provide that information to the EDR tool provider, and it's been tested, they've been submitted in court, and again, we're going to touch on that topic here shortly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Real quick, I just wanted to add one more thing about the time date stamp on systems and why it's really not part of Event Data Recorder EDR data. If you think about it, a vehicle does not have a central independent clock. Okay, the clock is in the vehicle's infotainment system, and the time and the date is set by the owner or operator of the vehicle. So how accurate is that? It's dependent on whatever time and date is set on that clock. Is it accurate? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Different time zones that it goes through, does it update it? There's lots of issues with that. So the time date on that is deemed to be realistically kind of unreliable. That's why they use ignition cycles, which are triggered every time the car goes through an ignition cycle, a power-up cycle, and then off. It captures that and that. So it's a more reliable way of determining time, although it is not as convenient as a actual physical time and date stamp. So that's kind of the reasoning and rationale behind why that's not part of event data recorders. But they are adding that as a feature. That's just one additional data element that can be used and be helpful in the future. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and we'll kind of move forward here. We're kind of get into some client consent and legal issues, and we're just going to briefly go into this. So a federal statute, it's the Driver Privacy Act of 2015, established that EDR data is the property of a vehicle owner or lessee of the vehicle. It also established that no one can access or download EDR data without the owner's consent or a court order. And be aware that some states have enacted additional laws that relate to the collection of EDR data, and those laws vary from state to state, so it's recommended that you do a little bit of research for the state that you're actually working in. Insurance companies have a duty to investigate auto insurance claims. And most insurance companies that use EDR data and EDR retrieval tools have some form of cooperation clause written into auto policies that states an insured must cooperate with the insurance company investigating the claim. And this may include downloading EDR data from the insured's vehicle, depending on your company's policy. Even if they have that policy written into your policy, just know that client consent will still be needed to download the data. Getting to the question, the topic that we asked about, is this reliable evidence? EDR data has been accepted as reliable evidence in court. You ask who would you call to testify? I think a lot of your attorneys would refer to different case law. So they would refer to different cases. I think a lot of these issues have been argued in courts before. I'm not aware of any one specifically to testify in person, but a good attorney would probably use case law where this has been accepted in courts in the past. And EDR data has been tested. It's been verified by the auto manufacturers, by different government agencies, and through independent safety research. So it's reliable, valuable, it's been accepted in courts, and it's good, reliable evidence in court situations. So with that, let's talk about retrieving or downloading the data. Remember, in most cases, data is contained in the airbag control module, and that's the module you'll need to communicate in the vehicle. You'll need to communicate with that module. The easiest way to do that, communicate with the airbag control module, is connect an EDR retrieval tool to a vehicle's OBD port. I'm sure you're familiar with that port. It's typically located beneath the dash or in the driver's footwell, somewhere there, and it's the same connector that your mechanics plug in their scan tools when you take it to do some service work, detect your trouble codes, or do a smog check. So it's a real common port, and it's pretty easily accessible. And that's the easiest way to communicate with the airbag control module to download the data. To access and download the data through the OBD port, typically two things need to be present. First, the car's electrical system must be intact and must be able to power up the car's electrical system. If all you're dealing with is a dead or a weak battery, you can use a jump box or alternative power source to just power up the car, and you'll still be able to download data through the OBD port. In most cases, you'll also need the vehicle's ignition key. Again, you don't need to start the engine, but you'll need the key to power up the car's electrical system to establish that communication and download the data through the OBD port. And if you're dealing with a severely damaged vehicle where the electrical system's been compromised, you'll likely not be able to download the data through the OBD port. In that case, you would need to perform what's called a direct-to-module download to retrieve the data. And this is done by connecting directly to the airbag control module. Essentially, you disconnect the ACM from the car's wiring harness and use a specific connection cable that matches the ACM. And this can be done with the ACM still mounted in a vehicle, or the ACM can be removed from the car and downloaded on a benchtop or other work surface. Specific connection cables are required for this type of download, and most of our insurance companies rely on outside assistance for this. They don't do this type of download themselves, but we wanted to let you know that the capability does exist. Now let's go over the different EDR retrieval tools that are available. Before we begin, note that EDR tools we are about to discuss are not standalone devices. They require the use of a Windows-based PC. Typically, any modern PC with a Windows-based operating system, Windows 7 or newer, will work. The EDR programs are not large, and they really don't require a whole lot of processing power. So a basic laptop should work just fine with the EDR tools. The EDR tools require their corresponding software program in order to function. EDR tools software programs are typically sold in the form of a subscription because they're constantly being updated. They're not just a standalone one-time use software program. They're constantly being updated by the auto manufacturers. And it should be noted that the EDR retrieval tools, they only image or copy the data contained in an event data recorder. EDR tools do not alter, erase, remove, or manipulate the data. They simply make a copy of that data, and once the data is imaged, the software components of the EDR tools translates that data into a human-readable form, which is an EDR report. So here's a list of more than 50 vehicle brands that are supported by EDR tools. You'll need a total of 4 different EDR tools to obtain crash data from all of these vehicle brands. For Tesla vehicles, you'll need the Tesla EDR tool. Hyundai has an EDR tool specific for retrieving EDR data from their vehicles, as does Kia. So what EDR tool or tools do you need for the remaining brands listed here? and that's the Bosch Crash Data Retrieval Tool. The Bosch CDR tool is the industry standard event data recorder tool. The Bosch tool supports the majority of vehicle brands, all of which are highlighted here. The Bosch CDR tool is the only EDR retrieval tool for these manufacturers that are highlighted. There are no individual EDR tools available for any of these manufacturers. The Bosch tool covers them all. So collectively, these 4 EDR tools will provide you access to crash data for most of the passenger vehicles on the road today. There are, however, a few brands that simply don't have EDRs in their vehicles, or they don't have an EDR tool available for purchase, and some of those are listed here in red. So these vehicles listed in red either don't have EDRs in their car, or they're just not a tool available for purchase. So let's go over a few frequently asked questions when it comes to EDR retrieval tools. Why aren't all tools or all brands supported by the Bosch CDR tool? Kind of as stated earlier, each car manufacturer decides how it wants to make their EDR information available. Most manufacturers decided to use the Bosch tool as their EDR tool solution. Hyundai, Kia, and Tesla have decided to use their own internal resources and have developed their own EDR retrieval tools. Are all car models and model years supported for each brand? Answer to that is no. Specific vehicle model and model year support varies from brand to brand. There is no set standard or universal coverage that applies to all vehicle brands. For example, Hyundai and Kia EDR support with their tools started with 2013 models. You can only retrieve EDR data from 2013 and newer Hyundais and Kias with their EDR tools. On the other hand, certain General Motor vehicles have EDR tool support going back as far as 1994 model years. So you'll always want to check the EDR tools application guide to determine support for a specific year, make, and model vehicle that you're working with. How much do the different EDR tools cost? The Bosch CDR tool, the Hyundai tool, and the Kia tool each cost between $7,000 to $7,500 each for those different tools. And the Tesla EDR tool currently costs less than $1,500. So that's basic pricing on the different tools that are available. Question, can you trust these EDR retrieval tools? The answer again to that is yes. The EDR tools we've mentioned and the data obtained with them have been validated by the respective auto manufacturers. Tesla connection cables and the Tesla EDR software are made by Tesla. The Hyundai and Kia EDR tools are made by GIT. GIT is the electronics division of Hyundai. So these Hyundai and Kia tools are made by the auto manufacturers. So what about the Bosch CDR tool? Bosch has licensing agreements with the supported manufacturers and obtains authentic OEM license data from each of them. So all of these EDR tools, including the Bosch CDR tool, these are the tools used by the respective auto manufacturers themselves to obtain EDR data as part of their own internal investigations and safety research. So it is validated data. The auto manufacturers use these same EDR tools to download the data when they're doing their safety investigations and crash research. So are there other ways to get the data? You may come across some other devices that claim to access EDR data, but I would be very cautious. You may stumble across some plug-and-play types of devices that offer very attractive prices. Some questions you may want to ask here are, how is the data accessed and obtained? Is it reverse engineered? Has any of the recovered data been validated or endorsed by the auto manufacturers? And has the data recovered with these types of devices been submitted and been accepted in a court? The bottom line here, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So buyer beware. And Jay, that concludes our portion of the presentation. For the attendees, we hope you have a better understanding of vehicle crash data and how it can be used in evaluating all aspects of insurance claims and exposing insurance fraud. Our contact information is listed here for future reference. And yeah, Dan and I will be available at the end of the entire presentation to answer any questions that anyone may have. We can take those questions now, or if you want to hold off, we can wait a little bit later. If not, we can hand things off to Heather.
Thank you, Scott and Dan. We've got one more question that I think we've already answered, but I'm going to read it again. Let me, and it's a little harder to read in the chat, so bear with me 1 second here.
Okay.
Would you discuss the need for an analyst that the data must be analyzed by a trained analyst regarding court testimony? Wouldn't you agree the analyst of the image data expert should be testify on the data retrieved? So if I understand the question is, would you discuss the need for an analyst the analyst to testify to the data that they obtained regarding court testimony, if I understand the question correctly?
Yeah, I'll take this. Most of our insurance companies will use these EDR tools for some of the basic claims, the jump-ins, hit while attended, et cetera, et cetera. If a claim is a high-profile case going to be litigated, or it's going to be a 6, 7, 8-figure settlement, you want to hire a third-party expert. So if it does go to court, you've got an unbiased third-party vendor to testify to the information. So our recommendation is, if something is going to court, to get a third-party expert, external expert, to testify to the data and the validity of the information.
Okay, thank you. A question from Michael is, are there times when EDR was so damaged so badly that the data could not be accessed or downloaded? Yeah,
there are. Keep in mind, it's referred to as the black box of an automobile. I wouldn't say that it correlates to the black box of an aircraft. Aircraft black boxes are designed to withstand severe impacts and fire and this, that, and the other. Can an ACM and the event data recorder be damaged in a crash? Yes, they can. It's pretty rare, though. They're typically very centrally located in the center of gravity of a vehicle. A lot of them are in the center tunnel, kind of between the two front seats. They're bolted to the floor. They're a pretty rugged device as they are. They're built to withstand a crash. If a car fire, car completely engulfed in flames and burns to the ground, the event data recorder and the ACM can be damaged. However, there are success stories with even a car that is completely engulfed in flames and burned to a charred hulk of nothing. Event data recorder data has successfully been recovered from that.
Yeah, we actually, in one of our crash conferences, we crashed the car and set it on fire. And as Scott mentioned, the EDR is usually central in the vehicle and very low. As you know, heat rises. So we removed the ACM. It was charred, obviously, but we were able to get the information by going direct to module. The car manufacturers know that not only the main purpose of the ACM is the EDR functionality, but needs to protect its occupants. So it puts it in a place, the best location possible, so it will make those quick decisions to deploy the airbags to keep the occupants safe. So we've had some success stories. It is a robust device, but yes, in extreme cases, it can be damaged.
Yeah, another thing with that also, water, okay? So a car goes into a pool or goes into a lake or goes into a river or whatnot. Water can damage an ACM and the electrical system and whatnot, but we've had success stories of complete flooded cars that were pulled out of a lake, and the data was able to be recovered from the event data recorder. So I would say for the most part, pretty rugged device, the data is not going to be damaged by most crashes that you investigate.
And just a follow-up question on having an expert looking involved and analyzing it. The question was, wouldn't you agree that the image reports should be analyzed? If that makes sense.
Well, any report's going to have to be analyzed. The report contains the data that was contained in the vehicle. It's going to take someone, a human form, to take a look at that report, correlate it to the event that you're looking at, the vehicle, the damage, make sure that they correlate, that the report you're looking at is relative to the case you're working, how to apply the different data to the type of claim or the different type of accident that you're working. Yeah, absolutely. Someone's going to have to do that and whatnot. It's the case, the type of work that you're doing with the claim. If you're just evaluating a certain aspect of a claim, it's really, really simple. Hit while unattended, parked unoccupied. Pretty simple concept. If data is there and it's related to the crash that you're working, you can be confident that the car was not parked off and sitting on a street when it was. It doesn't take a whole lot of analysts. You just have to have a good understanding of the data and how to apply it to that case. Even some other simpler cases and that knowing how to apply the data. The more complex you get, if you're getting into a vehicle reconstruction and you're trying to determine speed, or you're trying to determine this, you're trying to, yeah, absolutely. The training of how to apply this data to the type of incident you're working, it would go up with the different types of cases, how more complex the case and the questions that you're trying to answer with the EDR data. Of course, you're going to need to know how to apply that data towards that type of case, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. We have two other really good questions. Got a question from Craig Pusser with a CSAA. And Craig's question is, can the data be tampered with or erased?
In general, no. But like any device on this planet today, whether it be an iPhone or the federal government's computer system, anything could be hacked. But in general, the EDRs are pretty robust. Each have a level of security in there. There's no external tool that could easily change it. But to say it is unhackable in today's world, we can't say that. But in general, they're not tamperable. You can't tamper with them easily, but it is possible, just like anything else in today's world.
Yeah, I'd be aware also there are some auto body shops, repair facilities that have some type of tools or capability where they clear and reuse airbag control modules and whatnot. I think that goes against the auto manufacturer's recommendations when repairing a car. But we actually get phone calls from auto repair shops asking about the tools that we sell, saying, oh, I need this to clear the data and reuse an ACM. And no, these tools do not do that. They can't erase it. They are incapable of erasing, altering, manipulating the data. So there are some tools out there that claim to be able to do that. So yeah, be aware the capability exists, I guess. But in theory, the data is quite secure. Your dealership scan tools, for instance, that's why the auto manufacturers use these independent event data recorder tools. They use them themselves. Your automotive scan tool, if you have a Ford Focus that's involved in a crash, take it to an authorized Ford dealership. The Ford dealership with their Ford scan tools cannot access or do anything with data contained in the event data recorder. They have to be these tools.
Not to get into a deep technical discussion regarding some of these companies that claim to reset airbag computers, usually there's some physical evidence on the ACM that it will be tampered with if someone goes in there and tries to manipulate. In most cases, you'll see some physical evidence. And again, we won't get into that discussion, but if someone does tamper with it, in many cases, you'll see some evidence of that on the actual ACM computer.
Good. I've got a couple of questions, and we're doing well on time, so I'm just going to throw a couple more at you, and then we'll move on with Heather and John's questions here. Donald's asking is, who provides the training on EDR retrieval?
We, as Crash Data Group, for the tools we sell, we provide some basic training. Again, our main focus is a tool provider. We're the sole source for the Bosch and the Tesla, so we have to kind of remain unbiased, if you will. There are training organizations that are out there that provide this. This is actually a niche product, and there are a handful of organizations that provide not only training on how to access the data, but how to analyze that data. So there are organizations that specifically address the needs for training on these devices.
Okay, thank you. Matt had a really interesting question. Are you aware of any other locations that the data would be stored rather than ACM, i.e. Cloud storage? So basically, is the data being stored in place but the vehicle itself?
Most of the vehicles that are on the road today, to our knowledge, no. With future vehicles, it's a big question mark. Myself personally, I drive a Tesla, and who knows what's going up to the cloud, and you're going to see that trend in the future. But in general today, most of the EDRs they reside locally in the car and they're not pushed up to the cloud. But I would imagine that's going to change over time.
Okay, I'm going to go through one more question, then we're going to go over to Heather and to John. So, and this is from Tony. The question is regarding client consent. If the title has been legally transferred from the insured to the insurance company as part of the insurance settlement, is the insurance company now considered the legal owner of the vehicle to retrieve the data at will, or is it the owner at the time of loss who still need to give consent, if that makes sense?
Yes and no. I know it varies from state to state. Some states say that the crash data remains with the original owner at the time of the event. Again, there's no universal answer to that question. You have to check your local state with that information if it stays with the vehicle, or if the insurance company takes over the car, if it's now theirs.
And how would just as a follow-up, for a lot of folks here in California, what would the rules be or the laws in California if we're dealing with a California claim?
Jay, I think John is going to go into that in his section.
Okay. Well, good. Well, I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to switch it over and want to thank Scott and Dan for a fantastic presentation. Interesting, and we'll have more questions at the very end here. So thank you both of you so much for your time today.
Yeah, you're certainly welcome. Yeah, we will stick around for the Q&A period at the end of the other presentations.
Okay, sounds great. Well, Heather, I'm going to bring it over to you in just a second here. Bear with me. And here you go. And Heather, you should have control. And if you also want to give yourself a brief introduction, I would appreciate it also. And there you go.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Heather Roberts. I am a senior special investigator with Safeco and Liberty Mutual Insurance. Major case is my main focus. I have been in the insurance industry for 18 years. Started out for 2 as an adjuster and also a field appraiser, and then the last 16 years have been in special investigations. I want to start with a disclaimer because the information contained in this training is an opportunity that provides general guidelines for claims handling. It is not intended to constitute and should not be used as a substitute for thorough evaluation of the circumstances of each claim, application of your prior claims handling experience, and the exercise of sound judgment. Because laws may vary from state to state, check to make sure that you are in compliance with applicable statutes, regulations, and Department of Insurance bulletins. So what I want to talk about today is I've been using the CDR tool for approximately 3 years for my company, and want to go over some of the things that I've experienced and hope that some of the experiences I have, I can relate, give to some experiences to all those on the call. And maybe if you guys run into something like this, then you won't have to call the experts, call somebody to try and figure out what's going on. You might already have that knowledge. So one of the things is, how can CDR data help in review of claims? For instance, you're presented a claim where there's limited information about how the loss happened. You can also be given a claim where damages on the insured's vehicle are in question as if related to the reported loss. The insured's vehicle is supported by one of the Bosch retrieval systems. Something that's real important is you need to verify who the registered owner of the vehicle is. And if it's the insured, then send them an authorization to retrieve the EDR information. Again, as it's been discussed and also how John will tell you, each state will vary and you need to know what your state's regulations are. And then upon receiving the signed authorization, you proceed to image the data from the airbag control module, or ACM. Now, some problems when trying to obtain the image data. So some of the things that I've encountered over the years is the investigator arrives at the location where the vehicle is and finds that there are no keys available. As Dan and Scott mentioned, there are, are you able to image the data? In some cases, yes, but it's very limited. And so what I suggest to everyone is to make sure that you call the facility ahead of time. If it be Copart, IAA, one of the storage facilities, make sure that the keys are there, because that will so much make your job a lot easier. Plus, it'll save you a trip, because if the keys are not there, you may not be able to get the data and you may have wasted a trip. Here's something that has happened several times to me. You as an investigator arrive at a location where the vehicle is and find that the battery is drained. Can you still image the vehicle? And the answer is yes. Now, I have myself purchased a jumper box that I keep in my company car. That way I'm able to go, and if there's no battery, I can go grab it and hopefully provide power to the vehicle. Something else that's happened is we had a situation where we went to Copart and the battery was missing. And we tried something, and what it was that we attached the jumper box cables to the actual connectors or terminals not the terminals, but the connectors that you would normally put onto the battery. And I was able to get enough power to run the program and actually get a report. I would caution people, if you do not know how to properly put jumper boxes on, or to properly connect a jumper cables to a battery, that you don't do that. You have to know what you're doing to do that. So please, if you're not familiar with it and you're at a location where you can't get any help, then just don't do it. I'm going to say to everybody, err on the side of caution, because you don't want to get yourself hurt. Now, something else that really does become a problem, and the investigator connects to the vehicle and finds that the vehicle is not communicating with the software. So you have your computer, your laptop, and you have the CDR tool, the software on your laptop, and you plug it in and you've done everything with hopefully to the connection to the equipment, and it's saying there's a communication error. Some things that you can do is, especially for the newer laptops where your Windows 10 processing service, make sure that you have no adapters for your, like a portable mouse or anything else in the USB ports, because that will conflict with the communication with the vehicle. So pull out that, and you may want to restart your computer, and just that way it's cleared out of your system. Some things that I've encountered is, in a lot of times you have the key. So let's say for the cars that have keys, you put it in the ignition and you turn it to the auxiliary position, which is just the first click. You go to try and image the car and it will not communicate. I suggest at that point you turn the car to the full power, or even turn the car on, because if you're able to, because some vehicles the communication is best when the car is actually running. And the other thing too is, in some of the cars, and the biggest thing is if you're using the Bosch software, there's a help desk, and it is very useful in telling you what adapters may be needed for what vehicles. So if you have a car that's not communicating, make sure you go to the help desk and make sure that you don't have a situation like a Maserati. You do need an adapter. Some of the Fords, you need the adapter. Make sure that that's all done. And also always look at the Bosch system before you go out, because not all cars are supported like Dan and Scott mentioned. And I've also encountered a problem where my company car, just to test the system, found out that my car was made in Mexico and it was not able to communicate. It was not supported. I didn't know that until after the VIN. I'd already had to be plugged in and realized that the VIN showed that the vehicle was made in Mexico. Something else that can happen is, and this is something I've encountered, is the investigator finds a report that has information. Now, this is where you have imaged your vehicle. So you've imaged the vehicle and you've got the report, and it's showing that the vehicle is a right-hand drive vehicle or other questionable information. This happened on a case that I handled, and what we found was that this ACM was not for this vehicle. It had been replaced at some time, and the information that was on the ACM was not for this particular vehicle. It did not, and this was I imaged it, and then I had an expert go out and actually image it as well to make sure that what information I obtained was, I wasn't missing something or I had done something wrong. So just some things that I've encountered that I thought I'd pass on to those that are trying to work with the EDRs, especially if you're a first time or new to the system. Now, you obtain a report. How can it be used to review the reported claim? So in talking like Dan and Scott were talking about with the hit wall parks, this is a scenario that we've in the insurance industry have been dealing with for many years, but a lot more so even since the COVID situation, because people are just not out driving as much. So you have a hit while parked claim. You go out, you get the permission to image the vehicle, and you find that there's a report found. Now, does that mean that the insured is being not truthful? Well, you have to look at the report and determine that. In this particular scenario, you review the ignition cycles on the report, and it shows that at the time of the accident, or at the time that the ACM recorded this event, it was at 265 ignition cycles. You went out and imaged the vehicle at 2,660, and the vehicle was either at the shop or the house, and there was no other events that happened during this time. That will tell you there's a very good possibility that vehicle was energized when the damages happened. Now, does that mean that the insured was, now that can mean the insured could be in the car and turn the vehicle on and got hit while parked? Yes. But could it also mean that what they're telling us is not true? Yes, there's that possibility. It could mean that the vehicle's in motion. You would have to then look at the report and see if there's any speed or any other kind of data available to help substantiate whether or not the vehicle was in motion or not. Now, with a hit while parked, you would hope that there would be no report generized. So if there's no report, which would be expected if the car was not energized and parked and unattended, then it might help to corroborate the insured's statement. Here's another scenario. Your insured claims they were stopped when hit from behind and pushed into the vehicle in front. So your insured saying they're stopped. However, the front car and the rear car give different accounts of the loss. Again, you look at the damages. You can't figure this out because the damages aren't. You're not able to look at the damages and make an assessment. Your insured gives you the authorization to image the vehicle, and a report is seen that correlates with the ignition cycle's time of loss. Again, you have to look at the ignition cycles to determine if this is part or around the time of the event. and then you use the report to see if the insured's vehicle's at 0 miles per hour at time of impact, then they were stopped. But as like Scott and Dan had mentioned, there's the also, you know, could somebody have, you know, the scenarios that they showed in their videos with the cars hitting each other and who hit who first. So, and then if the insured was not stopped, now you have the scenario of who did they hit first, and then was there a second impact, that type of thing. So the report's very useful in trying to help claims evaluate what happened, who hit who first. You have another claim that's presented. As the insured stated, this is a very low speed impact, but the damages to the other vehicles are moderate to major, with injuries to all parties noted. So you have this accident, you don't know what to do. I mean, you've got the insured's vehicle damages that don't look like much. You have a couple scrapes, there's a couple scrapes on the front bumper and the grille. There's no recent repairs, so it doesn't look like anything has been replaced since the accident. And but you have the other vehicles' damages are moderate, where, for instance, the trunk has been pushed back up into the rear body panel. You have, you know, crush and to the quarter panels. Something's just not adding up. You're able to image the insured's vehicle, and this will help you, because if there's no report, then you have a likelihood of, you know, the delta V might not have been significant enough for a recording, but it also could be that did the other parties, you know, was there enhancement of damages? Are these damages even related? Also, could it be staged? So if there's a report, then you can use it to review if the loss was low speed as claimed or not. And based on the speed and delta V seen, you can determine whether or not your insured's telling the truth, not telling the truth, or there's other circumstances that you might need to further evaluate and investigate. One thing everyone has to understand is we have a lot of tools in our bag as investigators. We have a lot of, you know, we have the CDR tool, and we have a lot of databases and other tools to use to try and help with our job. And people need to understand the CDR is a tool that needs to be looked at as another tool that SIUs can use to help review the merit of a claim. Because our ultimate goal is to pay what we owe and verify, you know, be a fact finder. And if you're not familiar with how to read a report, discuss it with someone who is, or an expert. You know, if your company has people that are pulling the EDRs all the time and looking at these reports, reach out to them. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Also, as we do, we have experts that we use all the time, and you call an expert and say, hey, I need some help, you know, reviewing these reports. They will help you. And the other thing is, the report or lack of a report should be used in correlation with the entire investigative process, and it is not a standalone tool. So please keep your mind open. Please make sure that you use all the things available to you. And, you know, if you really have concerns or questions and you're not confident with what you've looked at, reach out to an expert or someone else for further review. And that is where I'm going to switch it off to John Colman. If there's any questions, we can go over them. If not, we can move to John's.
I don't see any questions, Heather, currently. So, John, if you want to come on, you should be
okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Heather. This is John Colman. They have not given me permission to access the screen because they don't trust me. So Heather is going to be going from slide to slide when I tell her next. Basically, though, December 2020 marks my 40th year practicing law in California. I'm still one of the only living, breathing attorneys with a 9-digit bar number. Pretty sure the only other two are Phil Siegel and Dave McDowell. So that's how long I've been doing this. And they've asked me to jump in and address some of the legal issues and strategies that go along with EDR data. So Heather, if you could go to next. These are the 5 areas that we're going to talk about. Basically the statutes and cases that Scott had alluded to. Also some of the auto policies, how does that relate to the duty to cooperate? And the duty to cooperate in the time of COVID-19, that's probably something we did not have on our 2020 bingo cards, even knowing what COVID-19 was or how the law and the regulations and orders from the Department of Insurance have affected those of us who were involved in these types of investigations. And then talk a bit about what the role is of counsel when we are involved in an SIU investigation where we do have EDR data to talk about. So Heather, next. Here are the 2 primary statutes that Scott referred to. The Driver Privacy Act from 2015, part of the federal statutes that apply to EDR nationwide. And as we know, the ownership of the data belongs to the owner of the vehicle or the lessee of the vehicle. And the California version of it, and again, I hate to mention other states because I'm only licensed in one of them, so I don't want to comment about any other states other than California. But California's California Vehicle Code Section 9951 actually predates the federal rule on the ownership of the data. It has the same general guidelines, and again, the data itself is outlined as to what can be revealed or released and what cannot. Heather? And that's the primary part of Section 9951C. The registered owner, in response to a court order, that's obviously something that primarily comes up on the criminal side, although we can touch on that a bit later. And that what popped up in the earlier question is the owner of the data, the owner of the vehicle, or the insurance company? And I am happy to be told that I'm wrong, but my understanding is that if the vehicle is totaled and the total loss documentation signs the ownership of the vehicle over to the insurance company, then the carrier then owns the vehicle for purposes of downloading the data. But overall, obviously the key is that there has to be consent by the insured. And what can we do to make sure that the insured does cooperate with us and provide the data? Next. As Scott also mentioned, courts throughout California, as you can see, these are both criminal cases, but they have both indicated that the EDR data is considered scientific and reliable. And that going back to the People versus Ferguson case and then later in People versus Diaz, they talk about the fact that that data is in fact admissible in court. It's reliable. I do know that there's one Nevada case as well that specifically said that the EDR data is so scientifically accurate and accepted that in Nevada court, an expert need not even examine the actual vehicle itself, that the expert can give testimony about the EDR data simply by looking at the data and testifying about it. So without belaboring the point, it is in fact something that's been proved reliable, it is in fact something that has been deemed admissible and admissible in court. At least we know that both in California and Nevada. Heather? So as Scott mentioned, the policies of insurance, the auto policies have duties to cooperate, and those of us who do this a lot know that the duties are pretty broad, but they're different in many different policies. And so the question is, what if we are getting pushback from the insured or the owner of the vehicle not wanting to provide the authorization for the download? And I just pulled up 5 random auto policies. You may or may not recognize one of these that you have worked with or that it's your company. Exhibit A is a pretty basic one in terms of what's the duty of the insured to cooperate. And the standard language, policy language, includes shall cooperate with us fully, that is, as is noted there in subsection B, shall provide statements under oath. And then D and E, shall at our request make available for our inspection any motor vehicle object or premises involved, and shall at our request execute authorizations to obtain any documentation that we reasonably request. So clearly, Exhibit A, by what it's said there in both sections D and E, certainly would intimate that the duty to cooperate there would imply the responsibility of the insured to sign the authorization for the download of the data. Next. Exhibit B. This is a little more bare bones. It doesn't really specifically note about the duty of the insurer to sign authorizations. So, is this enough? Is this enough, the language that's here in Exhibit B, to demand that the insured provide the authorization to download the data? And our view would be that the duty to cooperate in California, which we'll address momentarily, is in fact broad enough that it would require the insured or the owner of the vehicle to cooperate by signing an authorization, even if this was the only language that you had in this particular policy. Next. Exhibit C. Now we're getting a little more detailed. We've got the standard duty to cooperate language, and then look at paragraphs 11 and 12. Not only does the duty to cooperate require the insured or owner to permit the company to extract samples and fluids from the vehicle, including engine oil and transmission, certainly something that comes up quite a bit when we're looking at stolen vehicles and whether or not the insured might have a mechanical reason, a motivation to have the vehicle stolen. And then paragraph 12, you can't get much clearer than that. There's an absolute duty in this particular case for this insured or owner to allow the company to access and extract all data contained in your covered vehicles event recorder. Next. Exhibit D. As you can see, this has got similar language to that. Down on subsection 4B, this policy includes, in addition to other pertinent records, information contained in or transmitted by any device located in or on the motor vehicle. So I would argue that paragraph 4B most certainly permits the company to download the EDR data. And then I would also argue that this particular section of this policy would include also the obligation of the insured to permit the company to download the information contained in or transmitted by any device that, in my view, would extend to an infotainment system or other device on the vehicle that captures that type of data. And finally, Exhibit E is sort of Exhibit A+. This particular policy is written with a very broad duty to cooperate, not only including in subsection E2 the data contained in the event data recorder or similar device, but then as you go down and look further, it's got a GPS requirement as well. So I would say that this policy, like the one just before it and the one before that, are pretty clear that these policies have been designed to be broad enough to make sure that, in fact, there can't be a question about the insured having to give the authorization to permit the data in the EDR to be downloaded, and again, going further, to permit the infotainment data to be downloaded as well. So that sampling of 5 policies, it just is an idea of the fact that the EDR data is so important that it is specifically now incorporated into multiple insurance policies. And again, even those more bare bones policies, again, in our view, have enough of the duty to cooperate implicit in it that the insured should not be able to refuse the authorization to download the data. Next. So we're certainly not going to go into an entire analysis of the examination under oath process in California. Those of us who have doing this a long time are very pleased with the status of the court's decisions in California, both the Brizuela decision that we're very familiar with, as well as the Abdelhamid decision, which I've referenced here, because the decision in Abdelhamid is the one that really went further to indicate that in addition to cooperating by appearing for an examination under oath, signing other authorizations, that's simply not providing the additional information that the company has asked for is enough to suggest that there is a failure of the duty to cooperate. And I would submit that the failure to execute an authorization for the downloading of the EDR data under the terms of any of those 5 policies that we've listed would in fact come under the purview of both the general duties to cooperate and then the findings of the Abdelhamid case. The general findings of the Abdelhamid case were approved by the court in the Morse-Polich case, which involved a good friend of ours on the attorney end of that, for what it's worth. That case was sent back to the court on a different issue, but in its dicta, the court in the Strawn versus Morse-Polich case did refer again back to Abdelhamid as being a reasonable request for documentation. And again, while the majority of those decisions look at things such as cell phone records and financial records, it's our view that the case law in California is sufficiently clear that this would enable the company to deny the claim for lack of cooperation, arguably, if the insured refused when he or she had the ability to do it, to execute an authorization for the downloading of data. So that's the duty to cooperate up until April 3, 2020. And I put this notation up here because we find ourselves in an interesting quagmire, as it were, with COVID and how we've lived through it since March of this year. And as Don and Jay have so indicated, although we're not going to meet in Monterey in 2021, thank goodness we'll have vaccines and we'll be able to meet in April in 2022. Will be interesting to see if we've all been vaccinated, and if so, if those inoculations will in fact stave off those 2-hour or 3 or 4 hour cocktail hours at Knuckles. In any event, what we've found is we're troubled by the inability to outright deny a claim for lack of cooperation because of the COVID order that the Department of Insurance put in place in April. And here we are 9 months later, and the order is still in effect. And the copy of the order that we have there is that we, as policyholders, or as in carriers rather, we're not able to attempt to enforce policy or statutory deadlines, including but not limited to deadlines for submission of a sworn proof of loss. Other claims forms, which I would submit, would include an EDR authorization if the insured were adamant that he or she were not going to sign it, and examinations under oath. So we have not had a situation where we've yet, at least in our practice, had someone refuse to submit the authorization for the EDR download, but we certainly have had 6 or 7 or more months of pushback on not wanting to provide other documentation, such as a proof of loss, inventory, items of theft, examinations under oath. So these 2 paragraphs are just an example of how 2 different companies have dealt with this refusal to cooperate under the COVID orders. So part 1 is basically saying, if you don't give us the EDR data, and I just added that, we don't really have that case yet in terms of just full disclosure, but this company has written that until you cooperate pursuant to the terms of the policy, we're not going to be in a position to determine coverage, and we've sort of stated. The second one, this particular company is indicating that because of the lack of cooperation, they're closing the claim. Neither one of them have come to an outright denial, the concern being that the outright denial in time of COVID could cause some exposure of the licensee with the Department of Insurance. So these are the 2 types of scenarios that we found ourselves in. Again, I bring it up because we are in an unusual situation, and with some of those duties to cooperate that we would be able to otherwise be more aggressive with, we have to be cautious about that given the concerns that we have from the Department of Insurance. So there's no general questions on this part. Let me go on to what some of the options are, first of all, for an insured or vehicle owner refusing to provide the authorization to download the data. And these types of findings go not just with the EDR data, but generally if there's an overall potential for the failure to cooperate. One is what we would call a soft denial, sort of along the lines of gray fraud. A conditional denial, but we would allow the insured the option to rectifying by agreeing to cooperate, such as providing the EDR authorization or otherwise cooperating. An outright claim denial for failure to cooperate, again, recognizing that we have some COVID issues to deal with. The opinion of counsel, do we have enough to deny the claim, and then ultimately the denial of the claim, with the proviso that the insured should always be at least notified that suit may not be brought against the company without full compliance with the terms of the policy. Next. So counsel's role in the SIU investigation. The first one is probably the most important for those of us that are lay people, and that's understand the importance of the EDR findings. Scott and Dan have laid it out in great detail, and Heather said, don't be embarrassed to ask what, and I think it's really important, both for an investigator going into a recorded statement or an attorney or a claims professional going into an examination under oath, to be 100% accurate as to what the particular findings show from this EDR report. And those of you that have seen them, there are lots of dots and lots of graphs and lots of things that make my old long division head spin. So the important thing for me is to pick up the phone, call the recon who downloaded it, call the SIU investigator who understands it, and say, we're going to go into an examination under oath or a statement. What exactly does this mean? And what exact questions should I be asking the claimant or the insured that will correlate to what these EDR findings mean? What speed should I ask them that they were driving before they hit? How important is it for me to ask them when the brake pedal was applied, for example? Am I sure they were accelerating prior to the incident if we think it was a staged accident? When the insured has said, I jammed on my brakes. So I want to be able to say to the accident recon or Scott or Dan and say, hey, this report seems to indicate that the insured was accelerating just prior to the impact. How hard and how firm is that data? What exactly should I ask the driver to clarify what you said? And that is the part that is just important to me, as it would be with any expert. What exactly does this mean? What exactly does that mean to me in terms of what questions that I should ask? And I cannot underestimate that enough. As Heather said, all of the experts are going to be willing to tell you what this means and to help you understand the questions. And most all of them are going to be interested to find out afterwards what the insured said. So after you understand what's actually in the EDR data, we're going to look at the investigation that SIU has completed. And then at that point, is this going to be a situation where maybe the insured has given a recorded statement, maybe they've given just a statement of first notice of loss over the phone? Is this a case where the exposure is large enough and the concerns are large enough that we as counsel are going to either recommend the examination under oath, or we are going to agree with the company's suggestion that we will need an examination under oath to address the issues, not only in the EDR, of course, but the overall facts of the loss. Heather? So, again, I'm not going over the examination under oath process because most of us here either have been through it, know it, or know enough about it for me to skip through that part. But when we get the insured giving us testimony under oath, we're looking at what kind of a loss is it, and is it the one where EDR data is going to be really important to our determination of whether or not there's coverage or not. Parked and unoccupied obviously depends on the amount of the exposure and the amount of the damage. Is it a staged accident? As I indicated earlier on, is it one of those situations where we're concerned about the facts of the loss as set forth by the alleged claimants and the alleged insured driver? Are they consistent with the factors of a staged accident? Or is it a possibility of a stuffed passenger. What does the EDR data tell us in all of those three types of incidents, and how is that going to help us determine what kind of questions that we're gonna ask? And as always, before an examination under oath, and I would say the same would be true before a recorded statement, be ready to go over the questions that you have with your claims professional, with your SIU, with your EDR expert, so you know what you want to get into from the testimony. So are we looking for inconsistencies between what the insured or the driver testifies to and what the EDR data actually shows? Are there going to be inconsistencies between the testimony at the examination and the SIU investigation? We're going to want to have detailed, targeted, specific questions on all aspects of the loss that EDR data and the SIU investigation have brought into question. And again, the questioning that we go into on these can be many, many areas. And as we all know, the more you drive down or drill down on a recorded statement or an EUO on these facts, more likely than not, we're going to see those inconsistencies jump out. And then are those inconsistencies going to be ones that actually lead to the evidence of a material misrepresentation that would affect coverage? When I say the testimony should lock in the driver on potential inconsistencies, it's easy enough sometimes to say, were you wearing your seatbelt? Yes, and move on. And in a case like this where we're concerned, or in a case where we are concerned about someone being in the front passenger seat, which I'm going to hone in on, it's not going to be just enough to say, did you lock your seatbelt? I'm still so old that when I start to ask seatbelt questions, I still actually say, was it a lap belt or a lap and shoulder belt? And 90% of the people that come in have no clue what I'm talking about when I say, was it a lap belt? But in any case, we do want to make sure that we are going into specifics about that, which I'm going to show you next. Do we confront the driver or the insured with the EDR findings in the SIU investigation? So we have that report in front of us. We've talked to the expert. We've talked to SIU. We've locked them in with our testimony. Do we confront them with what the EDR findings say? Do we share the actual findings of the report itself? Or do we quote from it? Do we give the insured the opportunity to explain the report and our inconsistencies? And these are questions that you're going to have to consider with your claims professionals, with your SIU, with counsel. In each of these situations, do we or do we not want to share the data? And what do we do when we confront the insured with the actual data? So the next slide is this particular scenario, one that comes up a lot, but especially in Glendale, for what it's worth. But we have allegedly 2 front seat passengers, 1 driver and 1 in the passenger seat. Or is there someone in the passenger seat? The EDR data shows no evidence of a passenger. The insured who caused the accident, or perhaps it's a hit and run, is not going to be of any help one way or the other. Or the insured in a staged accident is going to be helpful by saying there's a stuffed passenger when we really know there's not. So is there a front seat passenger? We've got EDR data showing no evidence of a passenger. Our SIU investigation, considering, as Heather's mentioned, all the totality of the circumstances, attempting to correlate all the investigation, does at least suggest that there is a phantom in the front seat passenger. So the next few slides talk about a combination of questions that have been put together by some of our EDR experts, by our SIU investigators, by some other attorneys, addressing the issue of a claimant in the front seat when we have a question as to whether or not they're there or not. So Heather, number one. So again, this is one of those things where there's no perfect outline to questions, and those of us who have taught on recorded statements or examinations, obviously the worst thing in the world is to go down the checklist and not listen to the answers. So we always want to make sure that in the proper circumstances, we are asking these things, and are they going to help us not only with the EDR data, but that overall with the credibility of the insured. So more detail about what that person was wearing, pants, shoes, jacket, what was in your pockets. So we're talking about rear pockets, front seat pockets. What else might be in the hands? Packages. Are the packages something that could add weight? The phone, is it in their hands? As you all know, more often than not, right, that supposed front seat passenger is looking down at his or her phone, has no idea what happened. So we want to make clear that they really were on the phone. Who were they texting with? Who were they talking to? Because that's going to be their excuse for not knowing what happened. What position of the seat relative to the dashboard when you got into the car? Does that person know who sat in the seat last? And Scott mentioned earlier on about the height, the weight of these people. It's really important to find out if that person getting in the passenger seat made seat adjustments. We know that more often than not, the driver will make adjustments, but will the passenger? In other words, if the passenger is a tall person who got into the seat that was previously occupied by a height-challenged individual, did that person make adjustments to get the seat back? Do they know what the seat track position was? If they say they moved it, you can certainly ask them if it was a manual seat track adjustment or it was an electronic one. And then how far forward or far back was that person? Next. What position was the headrest in? Was that adjusted? Again, is it a car where the seat headrest is a solid part and incapable of adjustment? Is it one that can be adjusted manually? Is it one that is adjusted electronically? Something that I learned a few years ago when I was rear-ended is that certain vehicles' headrests have an active restraint that at the time of a rear-end impact, a portion of the headrest will actually come out further to further protect the driver from the impact from the rear. So that's a question that I would have never thought about asking before I sustained a violent rear-end collision, resulting in no damage to my vehicle, but that damn headrest came out and hit me in the back of the head. So I ask that question now. Most people have no idea what I'm talking about. When was the last time before the accident that the person was in the car? So was the seat moved or was it not moved? You can ask who drives usually more than not. How did you wear the seatbelt on the date of the accident? And have we had those situations where the insured might have said, well, the beeper beeped even when somebody wasn't in it, so I locked the seatbelt to turn it off? Is it possible that the claimant got in the vehicle and either buckled the seatbelt behind himself or herself or didn't buckle it at all? And you can certainly ask them how they entered the vehicle. feet first or backside first. This is also that one and only time where you can ask the woman in the front seat passenger seat how much she weighed at the time of the claim and whether she weighs more or less now. You can certainly ask that of men too, but it is that one time you can ask the weight question without actually having to apologize, and I think it's a fair question. Certainly if we have an issue with the possibility of a very small person or an adolescent in the front seat, it's fair to ask the parent, the guardian, about the weight of the child. And then that's going to be one of those things also where we find out what the weight of the person was to then go back after the EUO to your EDR expert and say, okay, this lady says she weighed 80 pounds. Is that enough to have the EDR trigger in this particular incident? Or we supposedly have an infant in the front seat, but it's a 50-pound infant or a 40-pound infant. Is that enough in this particular model to indicate that there was someone there or not? So it's really important to find out, again, what type of sensor, as Scott and Dan referred to, what kind of sensor is in the seat itself, and then what should or should not trigger the EDR finding if there in fact was somebody there. Next. And just some other issues about the seatbelt. As I mentioned earlier, what was the configuration when you got in the car? Did it lock without any problem? Did the seatbelt chime? I'm sure those of us who are drivers, many times the passenger will forget to buckle the seatbelt. It'll chime and will remind them to buckle up. So that's a question of the passenger. Is it possible that the seatbelt chiming was disconnected or did it go off? You can ask whether or not this is a vehicle the person's been in before. I put in here properly wearing your seatbelt because we've had people say I was wearing it, I wore it the normal proper way. Just like we would do with a detailed statement, either recorded statement, examination, deposition, the body movements in the vehicle, still very, very important. You know, I go back to many years ago when we would have an old arbitrator would say, look, counsel, we know they move to and fro in the vehicle. Let's just move on. Most claimants don't actually say they move to and fro. So it's important to ask them, again, how they did move in the impact. And then another thing that you're going to want to go back with your accident recon, does this correlate with what the findings are? And again, we're all pretty familiar with delta V. We're pretty familiar with the rules of relativity, but we still want to ask the insured or the person in the front seat sufficiently to make sure that we have their movements about it. And again, we want to talk about the body parts, where they moved, what part of the body was unprotected if there is one after the seatbelt, and of course what parts of the body struck what part of the car, followed up with, was there bruising, was there abrasion from the seatbelt, those kind of things that would further go along. And it's one of those things where 99% of the answers from the claimant lead you to believe that that person really was in the vehicle, yet the EDR data intimates that there wasn't a person there. Those are the kind of questions that Heather mentioned before it goes back to claims or a coverage committee. It's like, how do we weigh these things? We've got EDR data that shows that this did not happen as this person is testifying to, but this person is pretty adamant about what happened. Back to the EDR expert. What do you think about this, or what do you not think about it? And then to the insured, to the claimant, if we've decided to confront that person with the EDR data, we're going to read them the report. And the report says, sir, it is absolutely uncontroverted that there was nobody sitting in the front passenger seat. How do you explain the fact that there's a claim for a person in the passenger seat when there in fact is no evidence that person was there? What is the answer going to be from that person, allegedly phantom passenger, Heather? Right? I don't know. I don't know. Still a perfectly good answer to many questions that could be asked of an SIU investigator by a young investigator. Certainly to me, when a lawyer asks me a question that I don't know the answer to, which is, Mr. Hand, I just don't know. By the way, for those of you not in Southern California, a fun fact, Sean Penn there, Spicoli, believe it or not, has launched one of the largest COVID testing and COVID immunization programs in Southern California. He's given millions and millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of hours of time for something called CORE. So who would have known that Spicoli would have led the way into COVID and immunizations? Heather? So after this part, we, meaning your counsel, SIU, claims management experts, did this resolve the questions about what we had? Do we need any type of additional investigation, either through experts or otherwise? Did we resolve the questions? Did something come up where it's one of those rare circumstances where we need an additional examination under oath? Have we made a decision that although we had questions in the SIU investigation, we had questions from the EDR data as to whether or not this loss did occur, but we figure or we've decided that there's enough, either a question about it or we feel that we're going to err on the side of caution, we're going to resolve this issue and afford coverage to the insured, or we think we've resolved the questions, the information provided either by the insured, by the claimant, has not resolved the issues that we have. The SIU investigation, the EDR data, the opinion of counsel are all that this did not occur as reported. Either it was not a parked and unoccupied, it was definitely a staged accident, not an incident, or we're confident that there was not a person in the passenger seat such that we're going to deny coverage for material misrepresentation. And that's all that I have on my end. I want to thank Scott and Dan and Heather for setting the table. And I want to thank Jay and Dawn in particular for inviting me to participate. And again, looking forward to seeing everybody in person in April 2022.